are wondering what today's lesson will be about. Today's lesson is going to be about emotions. Now, we all start with a primary set, and as we grow older, we acquire more of them.
When your emotions control your action, it affects not only yourself, but the people around you.
This will help. Sit down. Emotions are centered in the lower part of the brain.
It is complicated, yes, but mysterious no longer.
Emotional behavior is largely involuntary.
I can't believe that.
We have certain basic emotions which are controlled subconsciously. Notice your own emotional reactions. What did you feel? What did you do?
Under control, your emotions can make you healthier and happier and improve the lives of people around you.
This is pretty clever.
That's a rather simplified suggestion of a complex mental process, but you get the idea.
Good morning. You guys still doing as good as you were just a few minutes ago when I asked you? Things gotten worse? Everybody all right? Like I said before, my name is Megan, and I get the honor of being one of the teaching pastors here at Real Life. So I already welcomed all of you in here at the Chelan campus, but I want to make sure that I welcome our Brewster campus as well. Some of you who are new might not know that every single Sunday, Brewster live streams in and is a part of our service with us. So they're tuning in. We want to welcome them. As well as our online viewers, we have people that tune in from all over the nation. Some of them are snowbirds, so they come here in the summer and then they take off, but they're still tuning in every Sunday. And some people are just a part of our online community. Like, for whatever reason, they don't come here on a Sunday to meet with us, but they're still a part of what we do here on a Sunday morning. So want to make sure I go out of my way to welcome them as well, because we're all here together, right? I know that in this room, everybody is on probably a different part of their faith journey, right? That's what makes Real Life so beautiful, is we make space for wherever you are in your journey for you to be here and belong with us. So like you've heard, we are in a series right now, a current series called Feeling My Way Through It, How to Make Peace with Overwhelming Emotions. And so the reason we've done this series is for a lot of reasons, but mainly life is full of these things that are really difficult to navigate. Not a single one of us gets through life without having to deal with difficult relationships, crisis, things that happen that we're not looking for that just happen to us, difficult in conflict, right? Politics, there's things going on in the world, social, political stuff that we're just a part of that we need help learning how to navigate. And so for the past 3 weeks, Pastor Kyle has been walking you through some pretty overwhelming emotions. So if you're new, if you're coming in, this is the last sermon in this series, so I want to catch you up to make sure we're all on the same page, we all know where we're going the same direction. So Kyle, he kicked off this sermon series with the overwhelming emotion of fear. So he talked kind of at length about fear and how if this is a driving emotion for you, chances are that there's a lot of what-ifs going on in your head at all times. Right? These worst-case scenarios are kind of framing your reality. And really, like, the root of that is that there's no place you can ever really go or a situation you can enter into that feels truly safe. Right? But you're not alone in that. There's so many of us, even if fear isn't the driving emotion, we all struggle with fear. And then he moved in after that, and he moved into anger. Right? For those of you in the room, you're like, fear, that's a weak emotion. I don't need that one. But anger, right? That's a big boy emotion. That's a big girl emotion. That one I'm a little bit more comfortable with. Right? But if anger is the driving emotion for you, chances are you really struggle to trust people. Right? And you navigate your life kind of like, oh, can I trust that person? Can I let that person in? And you're not alone in that either. Like, so many of us are like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about my fears, but anger. Yeah, I get angry. And then last week, he talked about control. And he talked about, like, okay, so maybe you're not comfortable with talking about your fears. Maybe that doesn't drive you. Maybe you don't want to be known as a hothead or somebody who just can't keep their cool, so you're like, I'm not going to do that. But then control is this really attractive option. Because what you get to do is you get to micromanage every emotion that you have. And usually that means that you micromanage other people's emotions around you when they love that, And so you're this person, you're like, okay, even if it's a false sense of security, even if it's like me making myself safe. At least there's a sense of that, right? I would much rather rely on control. And so those are the emotions that we've been walking through for the last 3 weeks. And today, we're going to talk about something slightly different. Something that might be at the root of everything. You know, I've heard a lot of sermons on emotions throughout my life. I grew up in the church, I went to the church, and whenever they would come to like an emotion series or a feeling series, it was always about the dangers of emotions. And I don't know if you're with me, I don't know if that's been your story, but that's mine. And I once heard a sermon of a pastor, and he got up and he kind of led with this. This was his leading statement, real strong, real convinced. And he said, feelings are not facts, period. And he's right? Feelings aren't facts. Feelings can change, they can move, you go through them. But it was the way that he presented it. He was basically saying, like, feelings are illusions. Feelings are distractions from real life. Only logic and reason, and I think he threw the Bible in there, only those are the things that can actually get you through. And I agree, feelings are not facts. But I do think they might be helpful data. Right? I think that they might actually be like good information to pay attention to. Maybe you're here this morning and you're like, gosh, I like that feelings isn't facts guy. Right? Like I prefer to talk about that. I'm not here for group therapy. You can just keep your feelings to yourselves. But I guess the bigger question is, what role do our emotions have in navigating life, if any role at all? And here's one of the things I think is helpful to think about. Emotions are not who we are, all right? I agree with that. Emotions are not who we are. But I do think they are how we try to make sense of who we are. They're like gauges on the dashboard of your life, right? If you don't know if you're running on empty almost, if you don't even know how fast you're going, if you haven't changed your oil, everybody knows that at some point you're heading for a breakdown. And our emotion, it's helpful data, it's insight. It shouldn't be driving the car, right? Pastor Kyle's talked about that. It shouldn't be in the driver's seat, but they are telling you how the car is running. They can be helpful, but only if we don't manipulate them, only if we don't avoid them, only if we don't control them or suppress them. If we stop long enough to listen to what our emotions, like what they might actually be telling us, I wonder if at the root of all of these emotions we've been talking about, our fear, our anger, this control, I wonder if at the center of all of those is the least liked emotion of all of them. And I wonder if we're actually trying to protect our sadness. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Yeah, we're going to talk about sadness. But if you're not comfortable with that emotion, that's okay. I want to tell you you're in really, really good hands. All right? So if Kyle, like he talked about last week, is the leading expert on control, right? I think he said like in all the nation or something like that. All right. Then I am the leading expert on this topic. Believe it or not. And I can prove it. I found this on the internet. If you've heard me talk at Real Life before, you know that I'm an Enneagram fan, all right? You don't have to love it. You don't have to be in my camp. That's fine. But I talk about it all the time. And it's a personality test, and it has these 9 different personality tests, and it just helps you navigate relationships, right? And so I found this on the internet. It's Winnie the Pooh and the Enneagram. So, like, you know this is legit, right? Like, I found this on Pinterest, which we all know is like the widely researched hub of the world. It's where you go to find all your facts and information. And the graphic designer, I'm sure, that came up with each Winnie the Pooh character for each Enneagram, I'm sure she fasted, I'm sure she prayed. I'm sure there was a really, really deep discerning process when it came to this. And so I just want you to know that I am an expert because do you know which character I am? Ah, that's me.
Me too.
Oh, good. See? God knew she's right here for moral support. Right? This is me. The saddest character in the 100-acre wood. Here I am. Right? I'm an expert, apparently, on sadness. But it gets better. Do you know which character I'm married to? Yeah, you guys are real smart. Yeah. This explains every single marital issue we've ever had. Every single one. I told you it's a helpful tool. But it's also what makes us great. Here's the thing. Here's what people misunderstand about my personality. And I have to defend myself because I'm in a room full of people that don't know me. All right? Here's the thing. I don't love sadness. I mean, I like it sometimes. But I'm not going to invite you over and be like, hey, let's just get hysterical together, right? I don't go seeking it out. It's not my favorite thing. I don't love sadness. I just see it as a gift. When most people, they see it as a weakness. That's the only difference, I think, for some other personalities and myself. Pastor Billy and I and Brewster, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he shares my affinity for cartoons that have really great storylines. And if you've noticed, every week we've kind of had this graphic that alludes to another cartoon, right? That talks about emotions, and that's Inside Out, right? Inside Out. Middle schoolers, where are you at? All right, this entire sermon is cartoon metaphors. Can you hang with me? Because I'm counting on you. I'm going to lose every single one of these other people. Come on, parents, if you've seen this movie, right? Adults, you know it's not just for kids. Right there, actually, it's really helpful in dealing with emotions, and particularly overwhelming emotions. And if you haven't seen it, I'm about to spoil it. So, it's been out for a really long time. So, that's kind of on you at this point. But at the end of the movie, the first one, the second one has all these other different emotions, which is awesome. You should watch that too. But I'm talking about the first one. At the end of that movie, Joy, right? She's the main character. And the entire time, she's just trying to suppress sadness. That's her entire job. That's her big motive. So she avoids her. She sends her on missions that are doomed to fail. Because Joy thinks that only positive emotions is what should be guiding Riley, who's the main character of the entire story. So her entire goal is just to keep sadness away from the steering wheel. See, I'm about to cry. I am Eeyore. She's trying to keep sadness away from the steering wheel of her life. Right? What they would call the control board in the movie. That's all she's trying to do. But at the very end, she comes to this realization that sadness actually has this vital role to play in Riley's life. And there's this beautiful scene, and she acknowledges that Riley needs both of these things to be whole. Joy cannot exist without sadness. Without both of these emotions working together, the main character isn't whole. So here's what I believe. I actually believe that God hardwired sadness into the human heart for a reason, and it's wholeness. Psalm 9:1 says, I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. I will recount all of your wonderful deeds. The person who wrote this is David. David had a lot of sadness in his life. He had to mourn the loss of an infant child. He had to watch his other kids that did survive grow up to be violent and rebellious. He struggled with his own sin and his own struggle with lust and power. So when he writes these words, he says, I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. He's not saying just with the happy pieces of my heart. He's not saying just with the positive parts of my story. He can write this honestly and with integrity because he's lived through sadness. It's a part of his story, and honestly, it might be one of the more important parts of his story. But let's be honest, happiness gets so much more airtime in our culture than wholeness. So much more airtime. Is experiencing emotions of happiness the same as experiencing a life of wholeness? What's the difference? So we're going into Thanksgiving week, right? It's a really hard week for a lot of us. I was asking the staff alone of hey, how are you guys feeling about going into holidays? And there are so many occasions for sadness this week. For all of us, there's some people, this is your first Thanksgiving with somebody missing at the table. I know those stories in this room. And there's a lot of you that you're like, man, I wish that person was missing at this table, right? We're kind of on either ends of the spectrum when it comes to Thanksgiving and the holidays that follow after that. It's supposed to be the happiest time of the year. But some of us are really just asking ourselves, how do I get through it? Something that's gained a lot of traction, I would say, as an antidote to sadness, and particularly holiday sadness, is practicing thankfulness, right? It's a good thing. First of all, I want you to hear me say, I am a fan of practicing thankfulness, and I can prove that too. Every morning when I take my kids to school, as part of our morning routine, I ask them, what are you thankful for? And I don't mean to brag. I don't want to be the mom that gets up here and is just like, woo, my kids are so great. Here's the thing. They are the most thankful children I've ever heard. I say, what are you thankful for? That mountain, that mailbox, that tree, my feet, my nose. It's like every morning, it's like the trees. It's always a big one. They always start with the trees, right? It's like anything they can see out the window, but like, that's it. That's what I'm thankful for, right? But I make them do it every morning. It's a good practice. It's a good thing to do. Here's what a few researchers have found about practicing thankfulness. I thought this was eye-opening. I thought this was interesting. All right, so a Journal of Research and Personality found that participants who kept a weekly gratitude journal reported a 30% reduction in depressive symptoms. That's good. It's an improvement. And I love this. The Journal of Positive Psychology. We don't do negative psychology here. Journal of Positive Psychology found that participants who wrote letters of gratitude to others, even if they didn't send them, which I thought was the weirdest part of the study. Who in the world would be like, I'm so thankful, you're the best, and I'm just going to keep that one for myself, right? Like, that's not the point. But anyway, they said, even if you don't send it, you can just write it. They experienced improvements in mental health with effects lasting up to 3 months. So there you go. That's all you need to do. Go buy a pretty gratitude journal, get past all this sadness stuff, and that suppressed, pent-up, deep down, buried pain will just melt away, and you'll be happy. At least 30% of the time. Up to 3 months. Is that as good as it gets for us? Is that how we handle this? And I wonder if some of us, we just feel this immense pressure this time of year to be grateful for things we're not grateful for. My son, Max, love him. Love him. He's a horse of a different color. Middle school, you probably haven't seen Wizards of Oz, right? Nobody watches that anymore. You have seen it? Okay, anyway, that's your homework. Go watch that. But he's a horse of a different color. And one of my favorite things, so my husband, he used to be a ski instructor at Snoqualmie Pass. Like, that's what he did for like a high school job. And it's always bothered me that he has like all these ski skills inside of him, because I've got zero. I can't get on or off the chairlift. Don't ask me to go with you. I can't do it. And I'm like, hey, you should really impart that knowledge to our children, okay? So one Christmas, I'm like, I'm gonna push this a little bit. I'm gonna ask Grandma to get them like the really nice Christmas, like the ski goggles and the helmet, and like they're gonna be outfitted. So like even if they get up there and they get my ski ability, they'll look good, so that's all that matters, right? So I asked them to do that. My two oldest, they opened up the gifts. They're like, okay, great, ski goggles. I mean, I don't even have a context. They've never been on a mountain. But then Max, he opens up the box, and I don't know what he thought was going to be in there. But whatever he thought was going to be in there was not in there, okay? So it was the most massive, epic tantrum I've ever seen. Just like, ah! You know, like you have young kids. They're like just mortified as a parent. Like, this is nice stuff. So I do my duty. I go into the back bedroom. I take him, you know, the mom lean. You get down on her level. Hey, Max, you don't have to like the gift. That's okay. But you do have to say thank you, because that is wildly rude what just happened in there. And it's all about me, and I'm very embarrassed. And so what I need you to do is go out there and say thank you. So his like bottom lip is quivering, you know, gets himself together. He goes out, He stands in front of her and he's like, all right, thank you for the terrible Christmas gift. One of our favorite stories, we tell it all the time, right? Thank you for the terrible Christmas gift. Is that what we're after? Does this kind of grin and bear it thankfulness, does that actually heal the wounded heart? As I looked into stats of practicing gratitude just a little bit further, you know what I found? You can find a counter study to every study. So I don't know, these studies are interesting, but I found a counter study from the Department of Psychology at Ohio State University, and what they found is that gratitude kind of as a rote practice, what I force my kids to do every morning, they say it just kind of has a placebo effect. It doesn't really have these long-term effects that we think they do. And in their study, they concluded that it's actually not helpful to tell people, specifically with symptoms of depression and anxiety, that they should just be more grateful for the good things they have. A lot of well-meaning Christians do this. I've done this, right? It just feels like the good thing to do to prescribe positivity. If you're just more positive, life is better. Jennifer Cheven, she led the study. She wrote this, and I thought it was really interesting about her conclusions. She said, it might be that these sort of interventions, she's talking about practicing thankfulness, on their own, aren't powerful enough. It is good to be more grateful. Right, I think we can all agree. It has intrinsic virtue. And there's evidence that people who have gratitude as a general trait have a lower incidence of mental health problems and better relationships. The problem is when we try to turn gratefulness into a self-help tool. Because gratitude can't fix everything. That's from like a non-Christian, just a woman doing her job and looking at the facts. Kyle talked about this verse last week. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. The act of giving thanks, that's directed at the good thing, right? Thank you for the mailbox, thank you for the pavement, thank you for the dirt, my nose, whatever. That's a good thing. But thanksgiving is directed to the God who gave the good thing. One is transactional. If I say I'm grateful for this, I get happiness. The other one is relational. If I actually tell the God who made me and gave it to me that I'm grateful for it, there's a relational strengthening that happens there. And believe it or not, your happiness will improve. Thank you for this job, God, because I know you are my provider. Thank you for this family because you're teaching me how to be a better father. Thank you for this disappointment. I don't want it right now, but you know what? It reminds me that you're my everlasting hope. It's a different kind of thing. So where do we go for deep, lasting, sustaining joy? Is there such a thing as that? Is that a real thing? Tyler Staton, he's one of my favorite authors and pastors right now. He says this. He says, joy is not something that you catch from time to time like a cold. Nor is it the fortunate state of a certain personality type, thank God for me. Joy comes from the intentional practice of remembering the good things God has done and trusting for the good things God will do. You guys, giving thanks is a really good thing. I want you to hear me say that. It's a good thing. If you don't have a relationship with God, if you're new to church and you struggle with optimism and you struggle to feel confident, start practicing thankfulness. That is a good thing. But thanksgiving, that's a God thing. And if you are new to Christianity, you might be like, okay, lady, great. What in the world do I have to thank God for? Everything I have in my life, I've worked my butt off to get. And I don't know if you're paying attention, but if you look around, there's a lot of disastrous things going on. If you and I could have coffee, I could tell you about 100 things that are happening here in Chelan or up in Brewster or wherever you're tuning in from that would break your heart. So if God is so good, and if he's doing all these great things, how come I don't see it? Why doesn't he come down here and just do something about it? Last week, Kyle was talking about how he made this connection between needing to control things with a childhood memory. And he had said that he'd been dropped off at this daycare, and they weren't kind to him, and I think that's a nice way of saying it, but he felt really powerless to change his situation. And so he thinks that that's when he started resorting to control in order to kind of navigate his life. And I have a similar story. It's slightly different, outcome slightly different. But when I was growing up, my parents traveled a lot for work. Traveled a lot. They weren't pastors. They were entrepreneurs of sorts. And so my brother and I were constantly being dropped off at houses, random houses, all the time, way late into the evening most of the time. And I remember there was this one family we would go to a lot. They were a family that went to our church. And I had been left alone with our older son. And I remember him asking me to do something that I knew was terribly wrong. I might have been 6 or 7 years old. And in that moment, I hadn't been baptized. I didn't think I've ever probably said my own prayer. Definitely didn't have a doctrinal statement, didn't have a formed theology, none of that. I heard a voice say, just say no. You can explain that however you want. You can call that my conscience. You can call that intuition. I don't care. For me, it was God. And so I just stood there as a 6 or 7-year-old. No, 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 no. I mean, literally, that's what I did. No, 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 like a robot. Totally weirded this kid out. Totally left me alone. And I woke up the next morning, and I went to go tell my mom what had happened. I was terrified because, like Kyle said, when you're a kid, you feel so powerless. You're like, they're not going to believe me. This is a church family. These are people that in our community are well known. And I went to my mom, and I was going to try to be as calm as possible. And I broke down in such sadness. And I told her what had happened. And she said, you will never go back there again. And I never did. But what I want to speak to in this room are the people, like, that's my story. Like, for me, sadness was a surprising vehicle that rescued me from that situation. But I know there are people in this room where you did tell somebody. You said the hard thing. You showed authentic sadness, and you weren't believed. I know we don't talk about this stuff in church. Okay, I think somebody should. And I just want you to hear it from me, somebody up here on stage, that I'm sorry you weren't listened to. But there is such power in brave, childlike, honest sadness. And I'm grateful that mine was heard and that actually saved me from that situation. And that's when I began to believe that maybe sadness can be a gift and not just a weakness. Because in that moment, I was so afraid, right? That fear was there. I was so angry at my parents. Honestly, my brother and I still talk about all the creepy places they left us at. I felt so out of control of that situation. And sadness set me free. James K.A. Smith, he wrote a book called You Are What You Love, and he wrote this. He says, sometimes in this fallen world, the best thing we can do is teach our children how to be sad. Now, I'm really aware of this in our culture. You're like, sadness? Like, that's the most unproductive emotion that there is. You want me to teach my kids how to sit in their sadness and just what? And I want you to hear me say, I'm not asking you to teach them how to ruminate in their sadness right? Worshiping despair or like hyper-focusing on all the things that are going wrong, that does no good for anyone. I'm in agreement with you. But learning to practice what the Bible calls lament. Now, that is perhaps the most important thing we can do. Particularly for this generation of young people who are growing up in the first time in the history of our nation and maybe the world where suicide is the 9th leading cause of death between people ages 10 to 60. Teaching our children, and especially our boys, how to be sad. It can't happen if we don't know how to be sad ourselves. The act of expressing grief openly, you don't have to do that in front of everybody. You can do that privately with you and God. You can do that in a community of people that you trust. But it facilitates this emotional release. That's a biological fact. It also promotes closure in areas that are just open. It's an open season for so many other negative and overwhelming emotions to move in. Someone in our community that does this really, really well is Matt Matthews. If you know him and you know his story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I love the way that he honors his son, Zeke, by talking about what he's going through as a family, by processing the pain of losing a child. And he was telling me one night that they were watching Yellowstone, and he heard this quote, and it really resonated with him. And so I wanted to share it with you guys. It says, "I think sometimes God gives us tragedy so we can pass along how we survived it to the next generation that suffers." It's John Dutton. He's basically saying, teach them how to be sad. So what is biblical lament? What is that? It's just an invitation to express fully the sorrows that we feel, the sadness and the pain that we walk in. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do, if you're new to church, new to faith, the most faithful thing you can do is say, it's not supposed to be this way. That is a true statement. There's an entire book in the Bible called Lamentations. And one of our favorite verses to quote when we're in that positivity cycle is his mercies are new every morning. That is in Lamentations. That is wedged between other verses that are like, God, you've turned your back on me. You're not listening to me. Where did you go? Your mercies are new every morning. Lament is what enables us to become people who are whole. So if practicing thanksgiving is how we directly thank God for the good things that we've been given, then practicing lament is how we go directly to God with the hard things in our lives. It's both and. It's not either or. That's the kind of relationship you're invited into. You don't have to hide the sad stuff from him. You don't have to put on a happy face with him. That's not the kind of God that we serve. Jesus himself sets the example for how to lament well. He does a really good job of this. He offers us this picture of what wholeness looks like while he was on the earth. Right? Shortest verse in the entire Bible, he wept. He was betrayed. He was familiar with pain. He was rejected. He lost friends to death. He was betrayed. And one of the most interesting things about the Christian story is that sadness he had in his heart for the lost, in his generation and every generation to come after that, that is what led him to the cross. If you pay attention to the Christmas story, or the Christian story, or the gospel, or whatever you want to call it, the saddest part of the Christian story is also the most joyful part of the Christian story. It's both and. Bible says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. This is the paradox of the Christian faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. What was the joy that was set before him? Like when you read that, you're like, what in the world could be worth going to be crucified? What joy is he talking about? Was there some big after party, or like where was what was happening? The joy that was set before him was you. The joy that was set before him is this relationship that he's inviting you into. He's like, this is going to kill me, literally, and they are worth it. It was his sadness that led him to the cross, of being apart from you. I want to go back to that emotions circle for a minute. This is how we're going to kind of wrap up our time together. Because I want you to see what happens when this joy and the sadness together of the cross becomes the center of the story. I want you to see what happens. So we're going to work our way outwards this time. So when joy and sadness, when they meet in the middle of the story in the crucifixion, we get to see this perfect example of the whole story being told, right? They don't leave out the bad parts. They don't just give you kind of like the homogenized or purified version. You get all of it, the blood, the guts, the gore, the joy, the love, all of it in one. So if the center of the gospel is the crucifixion, that joy and sadness, when we believe that this is true for us, when we receive that as the greatest truth we've ever been told, something happens. Peace begins to flood our lives. And not just in the emotional sense, but also in the real sense, because then we realize we have the atonement is what they call it in biblical language, scholars. That we no longer have to control every aspect of our lives because Jesus comes in and he calms the storm of our heart. He says, don't you worry about that. I died for your sins. I made you whole. You can walk in the peace that I bought for you on the cross. Isaiah 53:5 says, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace. You see that another paradox? His punishment, our peace, was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. By his wounds we get healing. And then after that, when you receive that grace, guess what happens? You're capable of forgiveness because you realize how much you've been forgiven. No longer do you have to resort to anger for others when they've hurt you, when they wrong you. You're not keeping score. There's no longer a tally. You are flooded with this real, personal, experiential forgiveness that then you can just hand out to other people. Because you've been reconciled to God in a loving relationship. And ultimately, if you put all this into a big package, this is what the Christian faith is. This is what we call around here real life in Christ. Because the saddest part, when it becomes the center of your story, it also becomes the most joyful part of who you are. This is what forms our faith. In case you're wondering, this is a biblical picture of wholeness, right here. This is really, really good news for those of us who have these fragmented hearts, right? We're controlled by anger or fear, or we just love to be controlling, whatever it might be. When you enter into the story of God and his center becomes your center, you are able to actually live with peace and forgiveness and faith. And again, this doesn't happen overnight. A lot of people are like, okay, so if I just say like, hey, yeah, I'm in, I'd like all those things. This is what Eugene Peterson calls your everyday waking up, going to work kind of life. It comes in waves and increments and seasons. That's how growth happens. But this is what you're offered. Here at Real Life, we like to do next steps. So this is something practical that you can take with you throughout your week. We do them here in Chelan and up in Brewster. You can find them on the blue card that you got when you walked in or on the app. And they're basically just something like, hey, you just heard all this stuff today. You're like, whoa, this church is heavy. Do they do this every week? No, we really don't. This is actually kind of out of character for us. But here are some next steps, particularly if you're not a Christian this morning. Maybe you're like, I'm not ready for all that put my faith in Jesus stuff. I mean, it sounds nice and everything, but I'm not there yet. Okay, just do this. The next step I have for you is you're going into this Thanksgiving week. Can I just encourage you? Can I ask you, just try to find the right emotion this week. Just try to find the right emotion. Because it's so easy to focus on fear. It's so easy to focus on anger. It's so easy to move into control mode, right? Like that napkin must be like that, and this has to be here, and everything. Like, it's so easy to do that this time of year. And I just encourage you, what if you just got good and honest about where some of those emotions are coming from? Just give yourself a millisecond of pause. Maybe just a slight bit chance that there could be some healing for you. You're like, you know what, this isn't actually about my fear. This isn't actually about my anger. This is about that sadness that I keep avoiding. This is about that sadness I keep suppressing. And you don't have to join group therapy. You don't got to write a song about it. You don't even have to cry a single tear. I don't care. Just find the right emotion this week. Do yourself and everyone around you a favor. And then if you are a Christian, this is your next step. Check your center. Check your center. If you attend Real Life and you are like somebody who goes to church regularly, you've grown up in the church, you know a lot about this churchy stuff, then I want to tell you the bar is a little bit higher for you. And here's what I mean by that. We have people every single Sunday that are looking to us to say, man, does that person really have joy in Christ? Like, is that person really like, I mean, they say they believe this stuff, but like, I don't know if I see it. Because if you really haven't let the joy and the sadness of the crucifixion become the center of your story, you're going to be living from the center of your own story. And fear and anger and control are going to be what's pushing you forward. And I got to be honest, we have too many people in the church that are saying they love Jesus with their whole heart, and then they're walking around abusing people with their unprocessed fear, anger, and control. And we don't want to be a church like that. So this week, as you're going in and you people all around you, people of faith and people not, check your center. And lastly, just come back next week. If you are new to church and you aren't familiar with the story of the gospel, we're going to kick off a new series called Advantageous, which is how the Christmas story unfolds. And so every week, we're going to talk about the story that I've been alluding to this morning. And so if you're just curious, you're like, man, I don't know, there might be something here for me. Can you please just come back next week? I'm going to end on this quote, and I'm going to turn it back over to Billy and Brewster. It says, pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our consciences, but he shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. I just pray that we're people who listen well this week.